Even though I'm introduced to Dutch audiences as a cosmopolitan, rather to my irritation, I feel like a little bit of a fraud speaking English as a fellow Dutchman to a Dutch audience. But I'm afraid that's the brave new world we're living in. And I will start with an Orwellian story I once heard in Japan from somebody who'd spent some time in a prison in Japan. Now, it's never very pleasant to be in a prison, but he said one particular aspect of being in prison there, and I suppose this is probably true of prisons everywhere, is a complete atmosphere of distrust. Nobody believed anything that anybody said, and which is a result, of course, of being alone and being subject to the whims of authority. You're not protected against them. So this went so far that when somebody would say, how nice, the sun is shining today, the immediate response would be, you're lying. So there was an atmosphere of utter cynicism. And I think what happens in prisons can happen to some extent, although one shouldn't draw the parallel too far, but to some extent in societies, particularly, of course, in totalitarian societies. And I'd like to use as an example China. China, in some ways, especially Maoist China, but even post-Maoist China, was like, or is like, a huge prison where there's a huge amount of distrust. People don't really believe their fellow citizens, let alone the authorities. Everything is assumed to be a lie. And the reason for this is that under Mao, in Maoist China, those networks of trust were deliberately undermined and even smashed. And the networks of trust, the civil society, those organizations that were independent of the state, of the authority of the state, were systematically smashed. Now, how does a people get back its trust? Now, one way is a great boom in religion, that at least which you have in prisons too, that you have trust in some higher being. Another way is the internet. And the boom in the internet in China is not for nothing. It's where you can find networks, informal networks, where you can find information that the state has not necessarily controlled. You can communicate with people in a way that perhaps regains a certain amount of trust. And there are very positive aspects to this. One was demonstrated after the earthquakes in Sichuan, 2 earthquakes in fact, where the state's instinct were to immediately control it, control the news, take care of the problems by using the army and so on, keeping civilians out of it because it would allow civilians to organize themselves and thereby building a certain kind of civil society again. Now actually, the internet allowed people to do just that. And many people were able to get organized and to go to Sichuan and help on an informal basis that was not controlled by the state. Now, the internet in that way is an enormous asset to China because although Maoist China, the excesses of Maoist China are gone, it's no longer a totalitarian society in China. One very clever aspect of the state, and this is something that perpetuates the atmosphere of distrust, the atmosphere of a prison, is that people have more individual freedom. People can choose their jobs, people can choose whom they marry and so on, they can travel, they can make money, but they're not allowed to get organized. They're not allowed to organize themselves in an informal way and build networks of trust that would be independent of the state and therefore break through the cynicism. And the things that were smashed in China were precisely those networks. In the first place, the family. The family was the basis of trust in traditional China. Then you have associations based on business or culture or religion that are independent of the state. And this was, because this was destroyed, you have this trust. And this has been, as I say, been regained by religion, by clandestine religion, often organizations that are underground, whether they're Christian or Buddhist or Taoist, and that are not controlled directly by the state. And the other thing is the internet. Now, there are dark sides to the internet too. Some people see the internet as a kind of utopia. something that will free us all. You hear this kind of language in the West, in Europe, as well as in China. Now the internet is the kind of perfect free society where we can all express ourselves and so on. There are, of course, dark sides to this, and this is not true, certainly not the case in China. One thing that the state does is, of course, censor websites, try and control the access of Chinese internet users to websites. But even more insidiously, the state will infiltrate agents into talking groups and that kind of thing, precisely in those informal networks that you have on the internet, pretend to be ordinary citizens, while in fact they're steering the discussion in the direction that the government wants. Now, why should we care about this? Why should we care about China? We could say China is a totalitarian or authoritarian society in the way that we are not. It's interesting, no doubt. We should know about the rest of the world, but it doesn't really concern us. I would argue that it does concern us because, especially as an answer to the utopians among the internet users, because our behavior on the internet is also subject to control of various kinds. We are manipulated, as the former speaker has already explained, for business reasons, for security reasons, and so on. Our access to the internet is not quite as free as we might like it to be. And therefore, I would argue that what happens in China is relevant because the tension between the authorities, the state, and the free individual and the networks, the civil society that exists on the internet, that tension, that conflict is being fought out in China. And I'll leave you with this thought today. I think even though in many ways politically China is by no means to be compared to a liberal democracy in Western Europe, the results of that fight, how the authorities and the networks on the internet resolve this conflict is a way will be a lesson to us all. Thank you very much.